Dragon's Dogma 2 is the long-awaited sequel to Capcom's cult classic Dragon's Dogma, and if you're like me, you couldn't wait to get your hands on it since it was announced. Dragon's Dogma 1 did so many things that I loved and wanted more of in any RPG game I played, but with the sequel, Capcom had the opportunity to add new features and right the wrongs of their past. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things Dragon's Dogma 2 does better and worse than Dragon's Dogma 1. These aren't in any particular order though, they're just what came to mind as I thought about it. Firstly, I want to start off with the good things and what Dragon's Dogma 2 did better, so we can see the good before we get into the bad. The class identity is basically what sets each vocation apart from one another, so it's pretty important given how much your character should change between them to make them stand out and worth playing. In Dragon's Dogma 2, I would say they get each class down pretty good. While in Dragon's Dogma 1, some of them feel like worse versions of other vocations, besides a notable few. Let's take the Warrior for instance. I have a lot of experience with the Warrior in DD2 and maxed it out in DD1 as well, so it's a good one to talk about. It also had the biggest change in my opinion as well. In the first game, it was really clunky and not very fun to play. It had limited versatility and just played as a stronger fighter with none of the speed. That makes sense until you realize how quick most enemies are. Even large enemies will usually move their bodies too much to land a critical blow. Meanwhile in DD2, the Warrior has multiple moves that are quick and effective against enemies that like to move. Not only that, you get two good moves for hitting higher up enemies, which was a real pain point whenever I played the vocation in DD1. Most of the classes follow this pattern of getting good options that weren't available in the first game, and most vocations just have a little more polish. They have better looking animations overall as well. The character creator is a night and day difference between games. DD2 gives many options on how you want you and your pawn to look. So many sliders, presets, and details can be altered on your character. The hair selection is a big thing for me as well, and the hair I use for my character is my favorite I've seen in all RPGs. It seems like on average, RPG games like to give us hairstyles that are grungy and way too styled, which isn't my preference. But the hair I use is so basic and pretty close to how my hair looks in real life for once. But in DD1 it's pretty standard sliders and base options with not too much variability. There's nothing bad about it, but DD2 definitely takes the cake here. What is an open world game without locations? Pretty much just a walking simulator. A world needs places that are worth traveling to, so you feel like the world is alive. DD2 has 6 main locations in Melv, Harv, Vernworth, the Sacred Arbor, the Checkpoint Rest Town, and Bakhbatal, with other small camps and such set up around places you might go. That's 3 times as many as DD1 has, which are just Casardis and Grand Soren, although they also do have some small places like the all-female camp and some other Checkpoint Rest Town. The world still manages to feel pretty lived in, however, which is a feat in and of itself. The pawns are your faithful travel companions in both games. They're the warmth on the cold roads. If pawns weren't in the game, I could only imagine how dull the world would feel. In both games, they add dialogue to things you encounter and can often help you navigate and learn of the world. However, not all pawns are created equal, and the ones in DD2 far outshine their DD1 counterparts. Pawns in DD2 have a huge number of dialogue options and keep the game feeling really fresh. And with the addition of inclinations that affect speech, it leaves a really good impression. Pawns will have unique dialogue based on their inclination, and the interactions they have with each other will also be altered as well. They also don't repeat the same lines every battle like they could in the first game. So they feel like characters all on their own, and not a robot. However, they do still repeat some, so I guess pawns like to repeat themselves. Oh fuck. Races are a staple of the fantasy genre, and here in DD2, they make their debut. While the list is short, it is just something to appreciate. The races include human, dwarf, elf, and beastren. Variety is the spice of life, and Dragon's Dogma 2 now has some extra options. Now this one is probably my biggest thing I love about DD2. It's something that is seldom seen in games of this scale, and it really keeps you immersed the whole way through. And that's never seeing a loading screen or having to wait to load a new area. This really makes the world feel real. It's something I didn't even really notice until I started adventuring to many caves, and wondered why I had never seen any loading screens yet. And I think if a feature is added and feels natural to the game, that means it's probably a good feature. Now we're moving on to the things that Dragon's Dogma 2 did worse. But trust me, none of these are really as bad as they probably sound. Kicking off this segment is the stories. The stories of Dragon's Dogma 1 and 2 are very different. On one hand, in DD1, you have a story of being the Arisen and fulfilling your duty, while on the other hand, you have the story of kingdoms needing the Arisen, and your fight to bring light to the false sovereign. Very different on the surface, but ultimately, both follow the story of your character just doing what any Arisen would do. I think where they diverge the most is the endgame. Well, technically DD2's endgame is actually postgame, but they're both the ending of your Arisen stories, so let's just call them both endgames. DD1 does it slightly better. I'd say overall I probably enjoyed DD2's story more, just because of the adventure aspect of the world, but if we're just talking about the plot and that's it, then the one in the first game has the edge. I like the finality and the scale of the final fight with the dragon, and the Everfall is a lot cooler than the Unmoored world. It has a ton of secrets and levels to it, and with the Unmoored world, all you really get is a billion zombies and skeletons. I mean, you get to see what the world looked like without water, but it doesn't really get much more creative than that. Although the whole end of the world feel is done a lot better in DD2. Having to evacuate everyone and do it in a short amount of time adds a lot of tension. Okay, so this one's going to be short, but it's just the clothing, and a specific aspect of it really. But I like the layering options in DD1 better. The more options and combinations gave you a way to look unique, and really set your Arisen apart. While in DD2, yeah, you get a good amount of options, but it really doesn't go past capes in terms of looking unique. At least for me. Class versatility is basically just the opposite of class identity. Guess you can't have it both ways. But where DD2 shines in specialization, it lacks in versatility. I think there was a better middle ground for some of these because some of the vocations really lack in versatility. Not to say all DD1 vocations are great at everything, I've already made that clear with the Warrior, but there were options like Mystic Knight and Magic Archer who had both magic and basic skills along with some good ranged options. While all vocations in DD2 are stuck with just 1 or 2 weapons and 4 skills. Although they did give us Warfare, which might have been meant as the bridge between these two systems. Still stuck with just 3 skills realistically though, so it can be a bit limiting. The romance system is something that DD1 and DD2 both share, so it's a good thing to compare between them. The real role of the romance system isn't really about gameplay as it doesn't have any meaningful effects. In DD1, your beloved will appear at the final fight with the dragon, but they never really get a spotlight moment again. While in DD2 they get a highlight at the end credits after conquering the Unmoored world. And they can also occasionally leave you gifts, and will offer an escort mission for you. I think that the dragon holds your beloved when you initiate the fight in the Moonglint Tower as well, but he was holding Ragnar for me, and he was in the previous area, so I don't know if he was just who I interacted with the most. Or if he's just a default pick for the dragon. But either way, DD1 makes the system feel way more meaningful, and the little shine behind their head is kind of funny too. They kind of just blush in DD2.
Masterworks all, you can't go wrong.
Both games have incredible enemies to fight. There's really no game that does monsters like Dragon's Dogma. From the soaring griffin to the drop-kicking ogre, there's really a lot of variety when it comes to things you can stab and pummel. But who does it better? Personally, I find the fights in DD2 to be more fun and engaging, but if I had to objectively pick which game has better enemies, I'd have to say DD1. That's if we're including the Bitter Black Isle DLC though. Which I think is fair because I want to compare what you can do in DD1 right now versus what you can do in DD2 right now. And taking that into account, the enemies in DD1 are way more numerous. A good percentage of enemies you face in DD2 are Goblin, Saurians, and Harpy variants. And even besides the small enemies, DD1 has a lot of large enemies that DD2 doesn't have. Like Hydras, the Dragon, Giant Eyeballs, the Cockatrice, and Living Armor, to name a few. Lastly is the themes, and specifically the vocal themes, with lyrics. There isn't a single theme in DD2 with vocal lyrics as far as I know. The music is as good as ever and fits the situation, but there's no title music, no ending music, and no climactic filling themes with vocal lyrics. Into Free and Coils of Light are absolute bangers in this game, and both fit the game so well. Actually, you can't even hear Into Free anymore in the first game due to some licensing issues when Dark Arisen came out, but that song will always be linked to the game for me. I thought it was so badass as a high schooler. And there we have it. A pretty good list of things Dragon's Dogma 2 has done better and worse than its predecessor. There's obviously things I haven't touched on in this video, so if you want to talk about some you think of, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. But that's going to do it for now.
Bye bye.